Several weeks ago, war broke out in Israel. And when that happens, we need to ask ourselves, is this part of Bible prophecy? Does this have any bearing on the end times, the coming of Jesus? Is this something we should pay special attention to? The answer is yes. Israel is ultimately the center of Bible prophecy about the end times. Jesus connected the birth of Israel with his return. In Matthew 24, he goes through and his disciples ask for a sign of his coming. And he gives them a series of signs, natural signs, political signs, moral signs. And then he makes an interesting statement. Verse 32 of Matthew 24. He says, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, these signs indicated, and the fig tree beginning to bloom, know that it's near at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." Many of us believe that there's a connection between the parable of the fig tree and the rebirth of Israel in 1948. After being scattered for 1900 years, God brought Israel back together as a nation in one day in 1948. So many of us believe that the fig tree is a symbol for Israel. Hosea chapter 9, the ripe figs were Israelis who were living for God. The good figs were the exiles who still followed God even though they were living in exile. The parable of the barren fig tree in Luke 13 is a picture of Israel. It was given 3 years to bear fruit and nothing happened, and then one last year, and if it didn't bear fruit, it would be rejected. Well, Jesus ministered for 3 years, gave Israel one last year to respond to him, yet they rejected him and crucified him, matching the parable that he gave. Matthew 21. Again, you've got a fig tree that was in season. It was ready to produce figs, but no fruit. When Jesus came the first time, he made it very easy for Israel to repent and come to God, yet they did not. In fact, they crucified him. And so just as that barren fig tree was cursed because it had no fruit, that's what happened to Israel. And so Israel, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the nation decimated, scattered by 135 AD and renamed at that time Palestinia by the Romans. So Israel does connect with the fig tree. So when we read this passage about all these signs of the coming of the Son of Man, and when you see the fig tree, Israel, beginning to sprout, know that the end is near. In fact, you could be in the final generation of all. This sprouting fig tree is a sign of the Messiah's return. 1948, miraculously. From all over the world, they had been coming because of Zionism. And 1948, May 14th, Israel was born officially as a nation again in one day. The fig tree began to sprout. And it's been blooming and sprouting ever since. It's become, even though it's one of the smallest nations in the world, one of the most influential. Jesus says that's a sign of his coming, and we could be living in the final generation. What's all this tell us? If you're not ready to meet God, now's the time to get ready. If you're not living for God, now's the time to live for God. And if you're not telling people about God, now's the time to tell them.